Thanks a lot. So good morning, everyone. So this session is not so much about one tool, but it's about a lot of tools. And I will give like small introduction on each of the tools. Basically to inspire you that in case you need some functionality, you know that tools like this exist out there. I work for a company called ASML. Basically, the chips you have in your phone and in your laptop are probably produced on one of our machines, but that's a topic for another day or during lunch breaks if you're interested. And the examples I'm going to show are actually on my GitHub repo. So I will show that one in a second as well. And the topics are basically divided in architecture, test, implementation, security, and builds. So if later you're curious, just have a look at my GitHub repository. So if you go to github.com/Johan Janssen, you click on Java Hidden Gems. You see it under the examples folder. There are way more examples here than I cover in this presentation. I have like 60, 70 different tools. I can't cover all of them in 45 minutes. So if you like this session, have a look later if there's more interesting stuff over there for you. But let's simply get started with the first tool, not waste too much time. So first tool is architecture related, and we'll start with ArcUnit. So ArcUnit you can basically use as like a JUnit-based testing framework to test the architecture of your application. So to start really simple, we want to define a rule that each class in a controller package, which has a REST controller annotation, which is used by Spring, for example, should end with controller. And I can write that rule in this way with ArcUnit. So you see it's fairly simple. I define the package, I search for some annotation, and I check if they all have a controller ending in 1. That's not the case. We have one actually that's wrongly named. So that one fails, we get the proper error message, and we know, okay, we need to fix this. So I can name this one wrongly named controller, and then my architecture is fine. Of course, use better naming, but you know that, right? And then we can also define other rules. So let's say nowadays it's popular to have this modular monolith again. We had the microservice hype, found out that wasn't the ideal way for a lot of problems. So now we try to do more monolithic applications again, but then nicely divide them in separate like packages. So with this we can actually check if the code is nicely divided in that way. So for example, we say that everything in the payment package should only depend on stuff in the common package or from one of the libraries that I'm using. So it shouldn't depend on stuff in the user package. That's something that we want to separate. And this way, because it runs as part of your unit test, it's checked continuously. So if someone by accident makes a mistake, or you have some new junior developer, or in general a new developer joining your team, this is automatically being checked. Now, for common, it should only depend on common, so shouldn't depend on payment, etc. So we can define a lot of different rules. And you can actually sort of define these layers to make it a little bit easier and just give them names. So in this way, I say, okay, I have this controller layer. It shouldn't be accessed by anything, because, of course, nowadays everyone uses a JavaScript front end instead of a Java-based front end. So the controller layer is basically the first layer at the front. And the controller layer can depend on the service layer, because there we have other logic. So this is basically ArcUnit in really short. And next we go to some more test-related tooling, and we start with Awaitability. So basically, if we normally write a test, so we do something async, which is happening here. I have a really nasty feature, basically, that adds something to a list. So I can assert here that it's 0 because it's happening async on the background. Then I do a sleep, and after that, basically I know that there's something in my list, or it should be there. Of course, this is a little bit ugly. This 2 seconds might be enough for my laptop. Maybe it's not enough on the build server. Or if I get a faster laptop, we're now wasting a lot of time because we're waiting for this to finish while it actually already finished. And to solve this, what we can do is we can use Awaitability. So we say await at most 2 seconds until some, don't remove the line, until some condition. So until the size is 1. So if we now run these two, come on. So we see the old one took more than 2 seconds and the normal one just 1 second. Of course, you don't win much, 1 second, but let's say you have a lot of tests and maybe this value is 10 seconds instead of 2 seconds, then it adds up after a while. So I can really recommend if you do some asynchronous stuff and still have these thread sleeps in your tests to replace them with Awaitability. Next one we're going to dive into is GOTO. Who knows GOTO here? So probably most of you use it. It's being used for basically coverage reports for your unit test. That's what most people know them for. So sometimes you integrate it with SonarQube to have the coverage reports there. But actually you can do way more with GOTO and especially the GOTO agent. So let's see how that works. So what we do is we start our normal application, but this time we supply that GOTO agent. You can just download it from the internet on the GOTO website. It's there for free. We specify where it should record the coverage, so in which file, and we can add some extra stuff. So I pen this false in this case, and I specify which classes it should measure the coverage. If you don't do this, it will also measure the coverage for your libraries in the Java code, etc. So you probably want to include a bit more specific. And then in the end, I basically have my application here. So let's do this one. So we'll simply run the command. We now have some application running in the background. And, let's see, where's my browser? I closed 8080. It wasn't 8080? Oh, wait, of course I need to add the endpoint. Core. So this simply returns some basic information. Let's not bother too much with that one. Then we stop the application. And then it writes back the coverage. I actually saw someone who attended me like, hey, you can actually do this live, so I need to stop it to write the coverage. There is actually a solution now in an article some guy wrote that you can do this live, so it will even do this for a live application. I still need to update my example to show that as well. So if you want to do this on like a production example, you can actually do this live. Then we use the GOTO CLI. That's also available on the same website as the agent to basically, from that target file that I have, the GOTO.exec, which is like a binary format, it's not readable. It creates a nice HTML report for me, which is then in my target folder. So let's open this one. And I can click through. And then basically, here I can see what my coverage was. So I access the car get endpoint. I didn't do any post requests or access the exit method. So this was basically, I just triggered the application myself. So it's like monkey testing or whatever. So maybe you're now wondering like, yeah, what's the use case for things like this? We, for example, use this. We had a lot of acceptance test-driven development scenarios written in Cucumber. And I was curious how much of the code it would actually touch. So we ran it with this agent enabled, and we found out that quite large parts of the code weren't covered by the Cucumber tests. And then we dove in, because I wasn't sure of your higher level tests in general don't cover all the branches, of course, but in this case it missed quite a lot. So we investigated that a bit more, and we found out it was actually that code, which we could remove. It was no longer being used. But with normal tools, with your normal JUnit coverage, yeah, it always has coverage, so it's used at least by your unit tests. So that was one scenario where we use it for. So if you ever want to try it out, it's really simple to set up. Next one is Pitest. So Pitest is a form of mutation testing. Actually, I think if you ever want to do one improvement for your tests, I would say start with this one. I think it's the most interesting one. So let's say we have production code like this. It has some if-else branches in it. Don't bother too much about what's exactly going on. That doesn't matter. And we have a test, which is this one. So I have a really simple test. So it doesn't cover all the different branches in my code by far. Now what I can do is I can run Pitest. It's just a Maven plugin. You can also run it with Gradle or whatever. It's also available for multiple programming languages. So if you do JavaScript, there is also one available. It's used more and more nowadays. So we can run this, and let's explain in the meantime what goes on then. So it runs the test on this code, the unit test I just showed. Then it starts changing the code, and that it's called mutants. So it makes several mutants. So for example, the bigger than, it changes it in a smaller than. And then it runs the test again and see if the test still passes. If the test still passes, then basically your test isn't really good because code is being changed without test failing. And it has a lot of these variations. So for example, here it can return 0 instead of a fixed number, etc. It does several mutations on the same code base. And for each of them, it runs the test again. So I would recommend running this like as a nightly job, not for each commit, because it runs like 8 times or something the amount of tests you normally run. So it's not something that's super fast. And then it creates, of course, an HTML report, which we can see. You can also integrate this, I think, still in SonarQube. And then we can see what went on. So here we see what was nicely covered and what not. You can see what changes it made. So for example, on line 11 here, it returned 0 instead of the variable that I put in, and it made more changes. So in this case, it made all these changes. You can also see which mutators are active, so what things it tries to change, and you can also configure them if you want to have less enabled by default or not. So this, for me, is really a good way to make sure your unit tests are of proper quality. I mean, sometimes you see that people try to get coverage to make management happy. I mean, we all know that 80% rule to satisfy management, basically. But it doesn't say anything about the quality of your test. If you don't have any asserts, that's basically a quite useless metric. With this one, you can actually see if tests are being done properly or not. And it also helps you as a developer. I mean, if you have quite complex code with a lot of if-else branches in it, and you refactor it a bit, or someone else makes changes to it later, maybe you forget one of these branches, and it's hard to reason which one you missed. But with this tool, it's basically automated for you. The next one we're going to look at is test containers. Anyone here familiar with Docker and containers? Guess everyone by now, right? So with test containers, we can basically automatically spin up a container during our test. So in this case, I have a simple MySQL application, and I want to spin up a MySQL Docker container. So for MySQL, there is a standard object that you can use to instantiate whichever Docker image you want, but you can use any container. So also if you make some container yourself, you can just use the general container and spin it up. This is mostly helpful, for example, with databases or messaging services like Kafka or RabbitMQ. If you want to test them in your unit test and also want to test them on your build server, it's easy if the container is spun up automatically. Else you need to install MySQL locally, need to install it on the build server, etc. With this, it's all being done by default. So it spins it up before your container starts or before your test starts and tears it down later. So we can retrieve the URL, the username, password, and then create a connection based on that. I created a simple as possible example, so I didn't use too many fancy frameworks in this one. It just puts some data in the database and then retrieves it. So we see automatically this container is being created. So this one's the MySQL one. It waits for the database connection. And then normally it should also finish the test. Ah, there it is. So this way you can easily integrate all kinds of tools that you want as Docker containers into your application. So next one, I'm actually going to try and cover multiple ones at the same time. So I'm going to show you how to use Gatling. Gatling is a performance tool. Anyone here using Gatling? Anyone using JMeter? Okay, so if you haven't looked at Gatling yet and you're using JMeter, I can highly recommend it. I worked with JMeter in the past as well, but I really like Gatling a lot better. So with Gatling, we can write performance-based tests. So let's have a look at the code first. So I write a so-called simulation. So this is my endpoint, basically. Then I write the scenario. I do the scenario in a loop, so it's executed 5 times. I go to an endpoint, I check if the response is 200 okay. I do a pause, call another endpoint, etc. So you can do whatever you want. In the past, it had a Scala DSL. Nowadays, it's all Java DSL, which you can use. If you prefer Scala, you can still use that one, but I prefer Java. And then you can specify different ways of ramping up the number of users. I use the ramp users because I like it. It starts with 0 users, then after about 5 seconds it has like 4 users, and after 10 seconds it has about 8. That's how ramp users basically work. So this is all you need to test a simple REST endpoint. Let's see, because I also need to start the application. So it's a simple application again to access some car data. And then I need to run it. But not before we also have a look at mission control. So you can use them separately. The only reason I use them both at the same time is basically to be able to quicker show more tools to you. So mission control is a way to see a lot of information of your application. And it can use Flight Recorder as well. Flight Recorder is like a profiling tool which has really low overhead on your application. Before, it was available as part of the JDK, but you had to pay for it when it was used on production. Nowadays, it's no longer part. You need to download it separately, but it's free to use everywhere. So if we start a recording, we can say how long it takes, etc. We can say how much detail it should cover. Of course, the more detail you enable, the more overhead will be on the application. If you do it really minimal, it has like a 1 to 3% overhead on your application. So it's quite effective. It's like if you use to visual VM or something, you can do more or less the same things with this tool. So let's start at the recording, and in the meantime, quickly start my get-link test as well. So we see how many users are active, how many users are waiting. So 4, we see how many requests were OK and not OK. Of course, this still looks quite basic. And we see that in the end, it generated this index file. Let's have a look at that. So for folks who are used to JMeter takes a bit of time to get used to. And then afterwards, it, for me, always took quite some time to create some nice reports out of it, because most of the time you do these things for management and they like fancy graphs and plots and stuff like that. If you use Gatling, this you get for free, basically. The report just comes out. So I can see the number of requests, how fast the response times are, max and mean, the percentiles as well, which is often used in companies. I can see how many users were active during the simulation. Because my loop was quite short, actually, the first user is already finished before the last user starts, so that's why you only see 6 instead of the, I think it was 8 that I specified. We see response time distribution, a lot of detail you can basically see for free. And then it's even more detail in here, so you get a lot of information there. So I can highly recommend having a look at this one if you need to do performance testing. Oh, I wanted to first show mission control. In the meantime, mission control had the analysis which was done with Flight Recorder available. And it, out of the box, already gives you some like warnings. So this one, for example, says heap content. Most of the heap was used by only a few classes. In my case, that's correct because I have a really simple application. If you have a big application and the heap is still used by a few classes, then probably that's something you want to investigate and see why that happened. Next to that, I can see a lot of information. So I can see which exceptions happened. I can see when which garbage collection took place, how large the heap size was, and all that kind of information. I can see which method took the longest. In my case, of course, it's a simple example. But if you have a big application, for example, I did this on an application I worked on, found out that a lot of time was spent in a specific method. Then we found out that there was actually a for loop inside a for loop, which we could extract to before the first for loop. And that saved us quite some time. So you can get a lot of details out of this. So if you want to do some profiling or performance analysis, I can really recommend this one. Okay, then we go to more implementation-related tools, and we'll start with equals verifier. Anyone here who wrote their own equals method in the past? See a few. Do you think it was correct? Yeah, I hear some people laughing. Maybe the others are quite certain that it was correct. So let's say we create a simple one. I have a student class, and I created an equals method. For me, looked quite okay, right? It compares the first and the last name. What could go wrong? And then I use equals verifier. So with equals verifier, I can basically say, okay, for that class, verify if something went okay. And then I check, in my case, I expected that there is an error message because I found out. And it says hash code should be equal. Okay, so then I was like, okay, how do I need to improve my student to make it actually comply? So this is the fixed student. So I added final to the first name and the last name, and basically I added a lot of stuff to the equals method. So this is a proper equals method, and we can check that by using the equals verifier again and check that it doesn't throw any exceptions. So this is a good method. So whenever you write an equals method, really consider using this tool to make sure that it's a proper one. And then we go to GraphQL. So what you often see if you have REST endpoints is that either you retrieve way too much information or too few. Let's say we have a huge object, a student, with all the courses that that person followed in the past, all the books the person read in the past, etc. But on the first page, I only want to display his first and last name. So it's quite overhead if I call that endpoint. And for a student, maybe it's not that much, but I've seen endpoints retrieving multiple megabytes only to display like one string. And of course, I can add like a second endpoint for just that string, but then you probably end up with a lot of endpoints. With GraphQL, you can basically filter this. So it's a little bit like SQL for your database. So you send like a query, I want this information back, and then GraphQL makes sure you get that information back. So here is an example. I have an account with a user underneath it. So in the first one, I only request the account. So I get back the account and the number, but we can see here that the user is nil because I only requested the account. Then here I do more or less the same, so I request the account, but I also say I want to have the user and the user's first name and the last name. And then I can see, okay, first name and last name are filled in. So this is really like easy from a user if you do the requests. Of course, creating the endpoint is a bit more complicated because you need to support these kind of things. It's not as easy as creating a simple REST endpoint. But if you have different requests and different data that you want to show in the front end, use this one. There is support for Java, so if you do a Java to Java call, but also all the major JavaScript frameworks support this, so it's widely used by now. Next one is handlebars. Anyone got recruiter emails recently for a new job? So you're curious probably, right, how they work, recruiters, because maybe after this conference you're like, I'm done with all the technology, I become a recruiter myself. So I'm going to help you with that. So you can use tools like handlebars or Pebble templates, which is a bit more advanced even. So depending on your use case, pick one or the other. And it's like HTML, but then with some extra things in it, like the title, and we see here, what was it here? It's like a for loop in it. And these are basically automatically filled by our Java code. So let's look at how that Java code looks like. So here, the person, we fill in my name, and then we create like a list of all the expertise. Of course, GraalVM, 20 years. J2EE, some recruiters think it's still relevant. And of course, you need like a really good function title, right? And then we can just run this one. In my case, I just output it to the console, but you can also output it to an HTML file or whatever you prefer. Then it fills in all the variables, basically. And here you see what goes wrong for most recruiters, right? If they, again, mess up your name. They just forgot to fill in everything of the template. So this, of course, I explain it a bit silly, but a lot of systems nowadays, they have some email functionality, which also is HTML-based, where you need to fill in some details. And of course, you can do normal strings and stuff in Java, but with this templating engine, it's actually relatively easy to fill in everything that you want. Yeah, of course. So the question is, why not FreeMarker? Yeah, of course, if you have another tool that does the same job, fine for me. It's, pick whatever you want. But I think FreeMarker maybe is a bit bigger also as a dependency because it has a lot of functionality. This is maybe relatively small, but I'm not sure. I didn't look into the details. But indeed, for some of the tools that I showed, there are other alternatives which might do the job just as well, or maybe even better. The next one is Java Poet. So let's say we want to create a Java file, which looks like this. So again, like a student with a first name and a last name. Of course, you probably created a Java class yourself, right? You can do this. But there is an alternative way to do it. You can also do it like this with Java Poet. So I can create a setter, a getter, constructor. And in the end, I add it all together in my student class and then do some logic. And it's automatically being generated this file and compared to the one I showed before. Don't do this on Monday on your code base, because probably your colleagues will be quite mad at me. Because it's not, you normally use this in like a standard project, but a lot of the tools and libraries that you use do this underwater to dynamically generate classes. So if you ever create like a library or a framework yourself and have the need to dynamically create these kind of things, then you should consider this. So it's just something you might have to use in the future. And then we go to lib phone number. Oh. This is always one that I doubt if I should actually show you, because basically you have these websites, right? And they ask you for a phone number, but I don't like to be called, basically. It's annoying. So I fill in a wrong phone number. And mostly just some random number, not from my mother or whatever, because she doesn't like that either. Because most websites, actually, they don't really parse the number. They just accept more or less anything as long as it has like your country code or whatever. With lib phone number, you can actually find out if a phone number is a valid phone number. And if it's like a landline number, I don't know if that's still a thing in Australia, but back at home, some older people and myself still have a landline number. And you can actually see from which city it is. So Van Rij is a city in the Netherlands. And I can also check like if that phone number is valid. And if it's like a mobile number, I can see what the carrier is. So in my case, KPN is a Dutch carrier. And I can use all kinds of formats. So this one, this one, this one. I can just check any number that comes in. So if you ever need some validation for phone numbers and you don't like regular expressions, then I can recommend having a look at this one. The next one we're going to is timefold. I think I still have application running somewhere. Yeah, let's kill that one. So timefold is basically used as a way to schedule all kinds of things or calculate things. Like you can use it if you have a shipping company and you want to deliver packages as efficient as possible, calculate the optimal route. So all kinds of these challenging things that you need to calculate you can do with timefold. In the past it was called OptaPlanner, but they changed the name. And I actually use it to show you how you can plan a conference and plan the sessions in a conference. So I added some rules, for example, that a room can only have one session at a time. Would be quite weird if there was another speaker next to me telling a different story, right? For speakers, also, a speaker can only do one session at a time. It's a bit weird if I need to be in 2 rooms at the same time. If I have multiple sessions, I prefer to do them in the same room because I know where the audio is and all that kind of stuff. So you see, it's all relatively easy rules, quite easy to set up. And if we have a speaker who has multiple sessions, I mean that speakers should be grateful, and for that we punish him or her a little bit and do all the sessions back to back. Basically, a nice extra challenge. And then we have one where I say, okay, here everything, of course, is in English. But in the Netherlands, we had some conferences in the past where some of the sessions were in Dutch and some in English. And it would be nice if they were separated in separate rooms so that English people could just go to the English sessions and the people who understood Dutch could decide to not go to them. So let's start the application. Look it up in the browser. Should be up by now, I guess. Yeah. So these are the slots basically that we have. These are the different rooms that we have, and underneath we have a lot of sessions. A lot. And then I simply press solve, and it takes a little bit of time. And I have my program done. But then when I was looking, I was like, hey, this is a bit weird. I have a room here, a time slot, 2 sessions in the same time slot. Anyone an idea how that happened? This one was my own fault, basically. I have more sessions than I have room available. So I basically made it hard. You see here, the score is also -2 hard, so there are 2 cases it couldn't properly solve. So yeah, you should solve them by hand or make sure you have either less sessions or more rooms available. So this one I put in on purpose, so that was easy to fix. But then I had another one, like this session is by Sander Mak and this one is by Sander Mak. But here there is none by Sander Mak, and we said it should be back-to-back if a speaker has multiple sessions. So then I was like, hey, how did this happen? And then I looked at the rule, and I defined the rule that a session was back-to-back as being within like a 30-minute interval. But there was a break in between of more than 30 minutes, so it doesn't consider it as back-to-back anymore. So if you use software like this, you still need to make sure that the rules that you specify are good. Because of course, I mean, there are no computer mistakes, it's human mistakes in the end. And this was just me defining a rule in the wrong way. So once you define the rules properly, it gives the good results that you're waiting for. Then the next one we'll cover is Apache Spark. I'll quickly start the test because it takes a little bit of time, and then explain how it works. So Apache Spark is basically a way to parallelize your processing. So let's say you have a lot of machines and you have heavy algorithms or a lot of data that you need to process, that you want to distribute that work across those multiple machines, and Spark helps you in doing that. I run it on a single machine because I only have one laptop with me, but it's the same if you do it for multiple machines. So in my case, I wanted to have an example with a bigger data set. So what I did was I downloaded all the reviews of Amazon of the last, I don't know how many years. That's 29 gigabytes, 41 million records, and I start processing them. So there's a little bit of logic in here, but most important is in the end where I filter it. So basically, I read all the review texts and I search for Java programming language. You guys did a bad job because actually there are only 28, so you should write more reviews of Java books. Let's see, how far is the running going? It's still running. And actually, so I say it's good for parallelizing work, but in this case I also quite liked it because I tried to create the same example with plain Java. But with plain Java, I always first need to Google how to read a file and everything. And once I had set that up, after like, I don't know how many minutes, it crashed because, yeah, it's 29 gigabytes and I don't have that amount of memory in my laptop. So even for, yeah, some heavy stuff on one machine, this could be quite helpful. And as you see, it finished processing in a bit more than 1 minute, which I think is quite good for so much data that has been processed. So then we go to the next one, which is OWASP dependency check. So this is simple, again, a Maven plugin which you can install, and then you can run it. So let's run that one. So what happens is there are some sources out there that have a big database of all the security vulnerabilities of the last couple of years. OWASP dependency check will download those reports, cache them locally, and then analyze if your application has one of these vulnerabilities. So like first time you do this, it takes quite a while because it's like gigabytes of reports it will download. So make sure you don't have these like stateless builds going on and having it download every time again, because that can take quite a bit. But after this has been processed, it should be relatively quick. And then basically it shows you the vulnerabilities that you have. Maybe now it's, so I created a local caching in Docker because I don't want to use the internet because it's not always stable at conferences. But it looks like it still tries to maybe do a bit more than I wanted. So let's leave this running in the background and see later how it results. But it should give a report on all the dependencies that have known vulnerabilities, including the severity and stuff like that. And it also creates like an HTML report for you if you prefer that to just plain console output. But let's look at another one in the meantime, then maybe this one finishes once we're done with that one. So Passay is a tool basically to define rules for passwords. So let's say you need some password validation when a user adds new passwords to your application. You could do like a regex and say, okay, it needs to have so many lowercase characters, so many uppercase characters, weird characters, numbers, etc. But then, yeah, you get a regex. I don't like them. I can't read them. And you have tools like this which make it way easier. So I can define the rules in like a normal language. I can say, okay, it should be between 8 and 50 characters, at least 2 uppercase, at least 3 digits, at least 1 weird character. I can, for example, say it shouldn't be sequential. So if I have like 3 numbers, it shouldn't be 1, 2, 3. That's not allowed. But like 1, 5, 8, it's okay. And it shouldn't contain any white space. Then if a password is being added, I can use that validator and simply validate the new password and check if it's valid. And if it's not valid, I can also retrieve all the messages. So in this case, yeah, I forgot to follow some of the rules. And if you then later do like a proper password, like something like this, then it's valid, this one as well. So if you ever need some password validation, I can recommend having a look at this one. In the meantime, my OWASP dependency thing finished. And it found some issue with log4j, apparently some security thingy in log4j. Maybe you heard of it. And then we'll go to the more build-related tools. So first one is Renovate. So the OWASP dependency check is quite good at detecting issues in your dependencies. But it might be even better to try to prevent them and make sure that you use the latest versions of your tools and libraries, basically your dependencies, and automatically update them. And for that, there are different tools available. So you have Dependabot and GitHub, and there are other build tools that have their own tools. I set up Renovate because it's simply one that's okay, but you can use any one. I think they work more or less the same, maybe a little bit different configuration options. Okay, internet's a little bit slow, doesn't matter. So basically what Renovate does, it creates pull requests when there is a new version of your dependency. So in my case, Job Runner has a new version, 7.2.1, and I'm still using 6.3.3. And the nice thing is you can completely integrate this in your build setup. So what we did at work is these pull requests are created, a build is run against the pull request, and if we see it's a green build, then basically we can merge it back. And you could even automate that process so that if the build is green, it automatically merges it back. And you can do a lot of configurations like only update these ones or only upgrade to major versions or whatever. There are a lot of ways you can work with this. And this basically helps you to just say, okay, merge to this new version. Because what I saw in a lot of projects is that this is like a manual step. No one does this, basically. And then after a year, it's like, we should update it. Or after 7 years, or way too long time. I've even seen it that if developers change the code and they add some functionality, add a new dependency, then instead of using the latest version of the dependency, they simply use the version that was shown in the article they read, which is often like 3 years old, and they just add it to your production project, which is quite, not really nice, because maybe if you go to a new version, the API breaks and you need to do a lot of refactoring. So I prefer to keep everything up to date. Then we have another one, which is Open Rewrite. So if you ever want to upgrade your version of Java, or move to another tool, or upgrade JUnit from, for example, 4 to 5, which I think a lot of us spend some time on, then I can really recommend having a look at Open Rewrite. Open Rewrite basically is like a recipe-based solution to change your code base. And change is in a really broad perspective. So let's simply show an example. Did I now copy the wrong one? So this runs It creates local changes, basically, yeah, Git-based, so you can still view if you like those changes or not. You can decide if you accept them or not. And then you can basically commit and push them to your Git repository. And what I find really nice is it's not only upgrading like dependencies or your Java version. For example, if you go to newer versions of Java, you have this multi-line string, where basically you have a string covering multiple lines, you add some quotes to it, and it's okay, instead of having all these plus signs and yeah, really ugly looking code. If you tell Open Rewrite to upgrade to that version, it will automatically convert your code to use these new features of the language, which I think is pretty amazing. That way you can get started way faster than having to do all of these things manually. So if we look at the diff of this one, for whatever reason, my laptop is really getting slow, but not much. There it is. So we see it changed the dependency, so from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5, but it also fixed my formatting. It also fixed these things, like this could possibly be null, right? Or in this case, not possibly, it's certainly null. And it fixes that automatically for me. It fixes my imports. It fixes my asserts. It uses the new, basically, structure of JUnit 5 instead of the JUnit 4 one. Also for handling exceptions, it fixed it automatically for me. So all these kind of things it does automatically for you. So if you ever need to upgrade to a new version of Java, want to make your life a bit easier, try this one. I mean, you can just do it, build it, and if it, for whatever reason, fails, I mean, you throw it away. But it costs you, like, I don't know, 5 minutes to set up, and then you're good to go. It's just a Maven plugin, some commands you run, and you're fine. And then, probably all of you, or a lot of you, use Maven, right? Anyone using something else than Maven? Few hands. So for the ones that are using Maven, we all know it's sometimes slow, right? I like it, but it takes a bit of time. So let's say we do a Maven compile, then we wait, and we sort of like this, right? Because it gives us some time to grab a coffee, go to Netflix, read a book, chat with your colleagues. It's almost Friday. 25 seconds. And let's say I use the Maven daemon and do the same. So Maven daemon is a bit like the Gradle daemon, but then for Maven. So it automates all kinds of things for you. And by the way, so this like treat at 7 seconds. If we do it again, it's even faster. Like first time is slow, relatively slow. Second time it goes even faster, so 1.4 seconds. So this is one you can use, but also Maven has like a thing, it's called cache extensions, which also optimize a lot of stuff. And for example, it also optimizes if you make a change in one of your Maven modules, but don't change the others, then it won't run all the tests for all those other Maven modules. So that way your build is way faster. So now, yeah, basically you can start doing this on Monday, or you can continue drinking lots of coffee. So now we basically near the end of the presentation. Anyone already knew all the tools? No? And then probably you all learned something new. And like mentioned, if you found this interesting, have a look at the GitHub repository. I think I covered like, I don't know, 20, 30 of the tools out of all the 60, 70 that are available. So there's much more interesting stuff going on there. And with that, I would like to thank you all.